Hey, how's it going, Doug?
I'm okay. I had a few moments to relax.
Oh, good.
How are you?
Can you hear me okay?
Yes. Am I coming through clearly? I've noticed
Yes, you're coming
there's
through.
some static occasionally.
No, you're coming in very clearly. I'm so glad to see you. How would you like to start, or where would you like to start from?
So there's quite a bit that's obviously going on. I suppose I want to note some ironic real world events where I know Greta Thunberg has contracted the coronavirus.
Oh, no.
She's self-isolating herself as recommended by most governmental agents. But my
But she's
Kentucky
not
senator,
sick. Has she reported sick? She's not sick, though.
no, she's decently okay at this point. I didn't read too much into it, but
Okay. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
she needs. No, I'm a little bit baffled that the Kentucky Senator Rand Paul had gotten the test a week ago because he was at a special event in Louisville, Kentucky, in which two people there had coronavirus. So of course everybody that was there got tested, but during that time he refused to self-isolate and was still doing his job, going to lunches with friends, and now he has the coronavirus as well, and he's defending himself, saying that, well, he felt fine at the time, completely going against the standard protocol that the average human being. So the government seems to think that they, at least that individual, Rand Paul, who you either love him or you despise him, like another Kentucky individual. But
Like Mitch McConnell, perhaps?
yeah, you might have heard of him.
Yeah, I've heard of him, all right.
It's just very ironic and baffling that something like that would occur. But so in other news, everything's okay. Family's well. Work, besides the mundane part of it, is going fine. Are you able to leave your abode? Or are you completely?
Well,
isolated?
I do. You know, I went out and get supplies and things like that as needed. Yesterday, the weather was so bad, I stayed in almost all day. Today's a beautiful day, so I probably will go over by the East River. There's a track over there and an outdoor, a jungle gym. So I might do some exercise. A lot of people are out there and running and jogging and doing calisthenics. So when the weather's nice as it is today, I expect there will be a lot more people out. Yeah, my feelings though is my eyes. I haven't been able to work on the book that you recommended. I read yesterday 2 chapters and loved it and want to finish it, but my eyes are giving out. I've been on the computer like 12 hours a day, reading things from all over the world, different reports. And I've been also communicating to a lot of individuals. And I just realized this morning that my eyes need a break. And I went out on my fire escape and I looked up at the sun through closed eyelids and take an eye bath. Your eyes can, when their eyes are closed, the sun can sort of touch the eyeball, and the whole visual and the whole brain, the brain is revitalized. But I found myself wanting to do more of that. And, take a break. But I'm really glad to have face-to-face experiences such as this, or face-to-face through a flat screen, because it's not really
Well,
face to face.
feel free to close your eyes at any time. I don't know if I'll exude enough light for you. You've got the
Well,
side
I
view
just
there.
I realized there's a difference between the light that comes from the screen, the flat screen, and the light that comes from the sun. A very big difference. And so, having said all that, I think it's important to differentiate the effects of different kinds of technology on our system. And I am wanting to get more into reading books rather than reading online, because that's really not very good for me. Too much of it. But
Right.
But these encounters, I think, are totally benign, because we're using much more of our sensory capacity and our relational skills when we're in this kind of space like we're in right now than when we're reading or looking at asynchronous communications, like you're reading a post that was written 5 days ago or something like that, sort of, and then you enter something, and then someone responds to it 5 days later, which for me is becoming more and more useless. Simply because it creates more people are out of sync with more other people. Whereas this is still using a flat screen, but it's using the flat screen in a very different way. We're much more in real time. Even though you're in Kentucky and I'm in New York, we're still, we're not out of sync. We can, I believe, if we're attentive, actually get into very good sync, because we've had very good communications with many of the members here. And I'm just mindful of, different kinds of tensions and stresses that everyone has to deal with as an individual. And we have this huge stressor, which is this pandemic and the shutdown. And, I don't know how long it's going to last. And also there's the worries that one has about your loved ones. I just contacted my brother last night, emailed him. He lives with my mom, and my mom's 89, and he's very stressed out, although he's handling things very well. And I have family members who who have underlying conditions. So these are all things that everyone's dealing with. So I think it's an opportunity, and certainly we can't turn this into something that could be a really wonderful opportunity if we learn how to resynchronize. Because most of us, I think, have been distracted by distractions so long, and we've taken it so for granted that we're going to be interrupted. That I think our conversations and our communications it's like, my metaphor is like walking on stilts. We're all walking on stilts, and we're so far above the ground, but there is a loose connection, and if you lose your balance, you're not just going to fall on your butt, you're probably going to do something much worse than that. And I think that's where we're at right now. Very, very fragile. Anyway, that's my spiel. I wanted to use this time, though, because I know it's limited, to desired outcome or a problem or a solution that might be happening, whatever. I wanted to also get a friend of mine, Seth, who works with Clean Language. He and I do Clean Language together to arrange a meetup. Hopefully you and maybe somebody else, like our friend Michael. We've done social dreaming together. I think that it would be a lot of fun to propose the idea of like a mini workshop. And since more and more people have more time than they usually do, I think it could be something, I think it's possible to pull that off. As my friend Seth, he's a wonderful practitioner. He also has a very interesting background. And he and I can't meet up, even though we live in New York, of course, because of the shutdown or the lockdown. but that we could get on a Zoom call like this and maybe do something together, I think would be great. And it'd be also a chance to meet new people, you know, which we usually don't do because it's just too difficult to set these things up for me. Like the thing that we did with Judith, she's in Australia. I enjoyed the occasion and I thought it was very creative, but I also felt it's really hard to make this stuff happen across many time zones with too many people. Maybe 2 or 3 people, maybe 4, but anything over that becomes, I think, more and more improbable. Although it has happened. I think it is happening actually with the Bernardo Kastrup event. I think there are like 6 or 7 people in the last call. I wasn't there because I couldn't get on, but I think that's good. That we can sustain this kind of energy, high quality energy together is very important, especially since we're under stress. Because I think as we've talked about many times before, the attention and the intention in groups, if we can share what that is, what we're paying attention to, and what my intentions are, and what your intentions are, we have a very good chance, I think, of making our communications more effective and, you know, creating a world we all want to live in. So that's my big spiel. I hope some of that made sense to you.
So you always make plenty of sense, whether it's received now or processed later. So yeah, I would love to be part of a clean language group. You also mentioned diving back into Milton Erickson,
Yeah.
or the trance work, which I almost went that direction, but I branched off into lucid dreaming, that the various states of consciousness or stages of the dreaming process, and trying to figure that out for myself. But trance is they're all tied together. These various modes of kind of not subconscious, but just a sub state of consciousness. It might even be trans consciousness, that they all overlap with each other in some sort of web. I like that. Going back to what you said about 12 hours of screen time, there's a reason why we limit our children to 30 minutes to an hour of total screen time per day, so they can go and play and process. And as we notice, those of us as we get older, or there's this strong desire to retain the childlike atmosphere around us and play and draw, work with our body ground. And so please don't be on screen for 12 hours. I did find a YouTube audio recording. I don't know if it's any good, of the Lloyd's book. So maybe that's something you can do in your spare time, is listen to it.
How
I don't know
is the
if
voice?
it's a good recording or not.
Okay.
It's male, standard American male. It sounded like. I don't think it was professionally done. It was just somebody interested in the book. So
I'd like to listen to
but
that. Might be a lot of fun. That might be a lot of fun to listen to, because it is a very an oral storytelling kind of novel, and it doesn't. And I think it would lend itself well to a spoken word. Most novels, I don't think, do work as spoken word. I think novels really are meant to be read, but there are occasions where a spoken word version of a novel can be very effective if the speaker is a good one. Yeah, I would love to do that.
Lloyd, that book, I wouldn't necessarily recommend. It's a good skim, but the middle part of it, I guess, John Uri Lloyd was a pharmacist, and he had lots of interest in the sciences. So I don't know if he was just doing it for his fiction, or trying to promote the hollow earth theory, whatever it might have been. But he was taking, his intent was to branch away from the standard scientific materialistic point of view, and to realize that other avenues of reception are possible through the sciences, through so the main character, I Am the Man, accounts his kind of skepticism when he meets another being which looks like the alien that we know, with a bluish gray skin, no eyes, kind of the peaked forehead, and he goes into these caves with this being, but they spend 3/4 of their discussion just dialoguing about how can this be possible? I'm levitating here. So Lloyd is kind of saying, well, scientifically, this type of stuff is possible because we see this here and here in science, but we just haven't given it enough time to explore. So yeah, telepathy comes up pretty frequently there, timelessness, precognition, things like that. It's very interesting because he wasn't necessarily, I don't know if he practices these types of things, but he revolved and participated in circles that were seeking ways outside of the sciences. So it's a strange read. It's definitely a cult classic. I can understand why someone would want to pick it up because of the theme alone. So listening to it, good luck if you do get a chance to.
Yeah, this sounds very exciting to read because it's in 1896. It was first published, I think, or written, and that was really a turning point. That was right before the new physics, and but there was a lot, I believe, of thinking about the fourth dimension was just starting to get into the public imagination, and there was an outbreak of people channeling, and even after the Civil War, there was a lot of table rapping and things like that, and seances, and people getting in touch with, loved ones that they lost in the war on the other side. And I think the psychic, what is the psychical research? The British, that research organization in Great Britain, which I think Frederick Myers, Kripal writes about Frederick Myers. They were involved in psychic research, and William James and a lot of other very distinguished scientists were engaged in that kind of exploration, which now, of course, would be considered totally weirdo stuff, really ostracized if anyone seriously wanted to investigate a seance. But I think this is I think we're in a very unique kind of situation because if you look at his situation, when he was writing this, he was in a library looking at old texts. And, oh, do you have a message there?
No, I was muting myself. I was making some noise, sorry.
So he's looking at books in a library, and he sort of is in a very agitated state when he first meets this strange phantom character in the library. And I think that's very interesting because we're now sitting in front of our laptops, I think, having very similar experiences as we create these kind of novel cognitive blends, as we're being bombarded by multiple messages from many different streams. And I think this is what I just listened to Weird Studies last night. And I think that's the podcast you may follow too, right? You know J.F. Martel, the Weird Studies.
Right, it's been a while since I listened to it. Did you listen to the Hillman? Is that the latest one?
I did listen to the Hillman, and I liked it a lot. But I listened to something by Pow is his name. He's a literary thinker, and he works with visionary material, and he's a teacher. Teaches in college, but they have an interesting discussion on the visionary and these and the difference between the auditory and visual systems, and how and our kinesthetic systems, and how there's a preference. Usually some persons have a preference for one over the other, Some people like them both. And I think each of us has a kind of leads with one system perhaps more than the other, but they're all important in creating synesthesias, these overlapping kinds of overlapping or the coupling of various senses and our language. So hopefully I think we can get more and more adept at this interplay between the senses and our linguistics, because I believe there's a deep relationship between hypnosis, lucid dreaming, out-of-body experience, and the conscious and the unconscious, and synesthesias. And I'm drawing on the work of Milton Erickson. Something you said made me go out and buy this. I saw it at a used bookstore, Milton Erickson and his hypnotic investigation of psychodynamic processes, because he's working with automatic writing and automatic drawing, which, you know, he's a quite a unique, I don't know if you know Milton Erickson, but he's quite a fascinating researcher. He was a psychiatrist, but he was probably the greatest hypnotist who ever lived. And I think he uses trance states and language in incredibly creative ways. So I've studied his transcripts quite a bit when I was studying hypnotherapy. And I got a chance to use it. And it taught me more about writing in literature than any English class. And I thought, you know, one of the things I would recommend when I hear people, you know, talking about writing, creative writing, and how you can develop your writing skills, my suggestion is you study hypnosis, because that's probably as direct a hit as you're going to get to the imaginal realms while you're located in your physical sensorium. Because it's really tricky. I think there's huge overlaps between the five senses and our other than physical senses, or your transpersonal senses, one might say. And this is where we get into the extrasensory. And this is a very slippery slope. I don't think the traditions, as brilliant as many of the practitioners were, they always came with a high price, and that's usually because they wanted to preserve the tradition, and some of it was kept secret. Maybe sometimes because there was a fear of persecution by outsiders. Certainly in the Gnostics had to keep they had to be very protective, and that's why they had to bury their sacred literature in a jar in a cave somewhere in Egypt, the deserts of Egypt. So there seems to be something about caves that have attracted people for a long time. It's a place to hide out from authorities. But I think now we're all like in our little cave, in our little hovels, communicating through these flat screens, and there may be some parallel, except these are semi-public, and I think that's what's interesting, that we can record these, look at the archive, and new things pop up that would not pop up, because I just noticed and I believe, and I think we worked on this for a couple of years, in cultivating a self-reflexivity in a group dynamic. And I believe that's what's so special about going into these archives and pulling out something that's recorded. And it's very different from a memory that you have. If you were a participant in a particular event, you may remember certain features of that event. Usually what's most affective about the event is what we remember. But then you go and look at the archive and you'll realize there are a lot more things going on than what you remember about that event that you didn't even notice in the moment. Which is understandable, because when you're in a performance space, you're performing. You're not thinking about what this is going to look like tomorrow or the next day or the next year. And I think that's what, it's more like, so when you're looking at the archive, it's definitely like looking at a movie that's fixed and it's not going to change. But the actual event itself is much more like a stage performance to me, because it's slightly unpredictable and improvisatory. And we don't have a script. We're making this up as we go along. So I think it's the interplay of that kind of unscripted, improvisatory, kind of in the moment with the group, and what happens when you look back at something in an archive and study it. And I think that certain patterns can pop out. And if you can feed that back into the group dynamic, then I believe something can happen. But you do have to feed, there has to be adequate feedback between the performance, between the archive, between those who are participating, to make it more, I would hope, that we could go meta through this process in ways we've never been able to do before. Simply because, you know, this technology does something very different than going to the library does. Where, you know, like I think the author of the book that we're both reading, he's going to the library and he's communing with minds through the written word, who may not be alive, may be dead and gone, but they do have a kind of life, or a second life, through the text. So anyway, I think this technology is taking us into the fifth dimension more and more often than we're able to track. I think those who are sensitive to these kind of communications and to the very subtle effects, we may have an opportunity to investigate going from a fourth to a fifth dimension. Many people are just, the physical world, of course, is restricted to the basic three dimensions. But I think you have gone much further than that, and so have I. And yet we still have a huge kind of, it's very hard for us, I think, at our current level of development, I'm speaking for myself, to translate adequately with the, you know, limited vocabulary we share with most people. I mean, vocabularies are evolving and changing, and words drop out of use, they come back into use, or they change their meaning through the use of certain groups, so that they don't mean the same. The same word doesn't mean the same thing 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 50 years ago than it does now. So I think these are the kind of tricky dynamics that we're playing with, and why I really enjoyed the opportunity that we had in the last session. I think it was, what was our topic for that evening? Oh, it was sort of an improvisational sort of get together. But I think that we took a dream that you had, a lucid dream. I think you said your fifth lucid dream. And I used a few clean language questions because I thought it would be really useful to get a strong, robust phenomenological account in a public space, because most of these do not happen in a public space. If they happen at all, it's usually with a therapist, or it could be somebody like a priest or a pastor or someone like that. But I would hope that we could, not that these aren't sacred. I'm not trying to make them secularize them, nor am I trying to make the paranormal normal. I don't think the paranormal will ever be normal. And that's not something, normal is not a goal of mine. But I think there is more and more interesting language games we could come up with that would far surpass anything. You know, we're going to get with the Google goggles, you know, or some sort of techno gadget, which would be fine to have these techno gadgets if you want to try things out. But it doesn't seem to me to replace or improve upon what we've already got. We haven't even tapped any of the potentials of and we're already shifting over
and
to
it's only going to be a perpetuate, even if it gets into that stage or a state where technology can tap into the fifth dimension. With what's set up right now, it'll be people applying for a job to do some exploration of this particular thing for the benefit of this or that company, so they can gain more knowledge. And I mean, that's something that was mentioned in one of the Jason Reza Georgiani, is that his name?
Oh yes.
He was mentioning these
Jason
technological
Georgiani. Yeah.
paths. Jason Georgiani, yes. But these technological paths that we could take will inevitably aim towards that direction if it's following the trajectory that we're on now. But yeah, I don't see you or any other attempt to monetize or standardize or desacralize to make it mundane.
I wish I could monetize this, but I haven't found that way. I can't work that way. It just seems to anything interesting starts to vanish.
We would be beyond the need for monetization at that point.
That's right.
The imaginal needs no. But I'm trying to tie together what you've been saying with what's been revolving around here. I'm trying to relate the dream state. So we discussed the dream. You created that space to where I could examine it a little bit further. I'll have to admit that when there's others around, I don't like to. So like you're saying, a one-on-one is much better than having 4 or 5 bystanders. Nobody wants to hear about anybody else's dreams most of the time. Say, oh, that's great, okay. But when we're exploring, when you are exploring someone else's fifth dimension, the imaginal realm, there's that chance to. There's a responsive attentiveness that's given to that dream state that can take us to a different level. So what we have saved in the archives online, whether it's a video such as what we a recorded video, or even a recorded text, so what we write on Infinite Conversations, we try to avoid saying, oh, we're going to meet up here at this time. We want to save that for like a separate discussion, so we can keep the thread flowing with some sort of graceful transition into tapping into our collective, the collective notation. So, for example, not 5 years ago, but when the Bubbles conversations first started, you did mention Georgiani and the book Prometheus and Atlas.
Oh, I love that.
The very first conversation on that. And that led me to where I am at now. So there's all these revolving bits and pieces. It can be planetary, viewed as planetary bits, and we kind of, like you're saying with these videos, we can't capture everything in the moment, but just like going back to a dream state, or if we go from hypnagogic imagery into the dream state and then into the waking state and hypnopompia, then we're in a sense representing the dream state. It's not what's in the dream is not there's something about it that disrupts or takes away who we are, or our being, or our core selves, to the point that I've heard it called by, I think it was Bachelard, calls it the abduction of the being. So in a sense, we're literally being abducted in our sleep, taken into these tidbits of information, or not information, but tidbits of these collective whatever, and piecing it together in such a way that makes sense. It makes complete sense this time. And we wake up into that, and if we review what we lost after we wake up. So we end this recording, we're going to say, oh, that was a great talk, but where were we? What happened? And that chance to review or reflect and take the key word and then mash those together, and then again have a night of dream material, and that will pop up as another representation of this realm. And yeah, in a way it goes back to I tend to latch on being. You like the becoming side of things, and goes back to the sun and the shadow, perhaps. So to actually make it a tangible, makes a imaginal realm tangible for me at this time is really to grapple onto that core. And I've lost where I was going.
Can I backtrack a little bit? And a representation of that realm. And you're more interested in being, and I'm more interested in becoming, and sun and shadow. And a review of what we lost. In the imaginal realm, tangible. And grapple onto that. And with all of that, what would you like to have happen in this session that we're having right now, or this meeting we're having right now? That would really be useful for you.
I think what we as a collective, especially these past 2-3 weeks with the Axial Age call, the conversation there, the poetry group reading Milton, Savitri, with our exploration on Friday of the meaning within this crisis, or the opportunity, the calm within the storm. And for me personally, the attempt to find meaning through others, the tapping into power and the shared power is important for me. There's the metaphor of Prometheus and feeling fire, but I think I haven't read the patterning in Speak, but I assume it leads to the point that the stealing of fire needs to be, we need a different metaphor, perhaps. There doesn't need to be any theft involved. And like you're saying, there's a basking in the light. This light can be viewed in darkness. This light can have, it can have various meanings for whoever's interpreting it. I'm thinking of one of the first cafes we had that EJ let out. Can't think of the book's name right now, but but all signs point to light for in that book. The V Arthur Young flexive universe, I believe.
Yep. That's
right. So this idea of light can be seen or witnessed in the stillness, in the dark. It can be witnessed at any time.
And
oh,
I'm sorry.
So this, I guess to sum up whatever
Okay.
that was, for this to be useful for me, for this session to be useful, I'd like to maybe define, not define, but seek the light in others, in myself, in my actions. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. And seek the light in others and myself and my action. And when I seek the light in others and myself and my actions, is there anything else about light?
It wants to be felt. I want to feel this light. I feel it within my body. I know when it's there. It's in the heart space. I'm continually pointing around my chest area. That's I might have mentioned previously, exploring from the ground up and from the top down. And I feel like there's not a shutting off of my breath, but it's a compression into this general space. And have yet to fully explore this region.
And you have yet to fully explore this region. And I want to feel this light. And you know where this light is. And you want to fully explore this region. And when you fully explore this region, then what happens?
There's a deeper sense of what's being talked about when we talk about love. It is, going back to power, it is an unfathomable, powerful aspect of our being, ourself, and how we choose to become and emit that light back into the world.
And to become and emit back that light into the world. And when become that light and emit back into the world, what happens right before become light? and emit back into the world.
So before that act, there's reconciliation, perhaps, or the going into ourselves. So there's that cavernous, unknown, silent core of our being. And it takes time. Yeah.
And
time
cavern,
to right. It takes time to receive, just as you cannot enter into a trance state immediately unless you're skilled. For the adept, for the person on trial, there's that process. But going back to the right before, there's a moment there where perhaps we are going back to the lucid dreaming metaphor. Like we are asleep, and then there's the moment of the realization that we are awake. What happens right at that moment to make us awake? It's a preparation for the unknown, for this collective piecing, and it comes into that moment.
and a preparation for the unknown, a moment, and going back. And it takes time to receive. And cavernous, unknown, silence, core of our being. And then, what happens to light?
In Lloyd's book, there's a point in which, when they first enter into this cavernous realm, I am the man is baffled that he expects to be completely blind in this dark area, and then as they progress, it's not necessarily his eyes adjusting, but he feels some sort of, like, there's a light present even in the darkness, and he's checking out his hands and he can witness some form of energy. So the light appears in a different form, not as we view it with our eyes. Others call it the rainbow light, the dawning of the clear light, whatever it might be. Very tangible, while at the same time, my explanation right now probably won't make sense if I'm to listen back on it, what I'm saying, or won't be directly felt.
And it won't be directly felt? I may have misheard you. And the light appears in a different form. And when light appears in a different form, and I want to feel this light, can that happen?
I'm finding it humorous, but it's similar to what we were talking about before. It's the representation. So for it to be felt again is to maybe a paradox. Can direct experience be felt as it was before? Perhaps, but it will come in a different form and either be more powerful or perhaps better recognized, and then we can explore that experience further.
And we can explore that experience further. And representation. And then what happens to light in other?
I often have these metaphors, or the visual presentation is a connection to the heart that I'm wishing to experience with others. Occasionally, perhaps it'll be this mental connection, but the light that we're exploring right now, I envision it from the heart space. And there's two types of others I'm sensing right now, and one other is one that as we have convinced ourselves of kind of the poetic quality of our will to become as we so desire, we can express that and share it directly to another, and another that has that within them can inject it, or maybe not inject, but we can receive and be received.
And receive and be received, and two types of other. And whereabouts two types of other? Is there a size or a shape?
Imagining the actual communication, the torso, let's say, branching out the shape to these two others. They're 6 feet away, a safe distance at this point in time. No, I'm just kidding. They are within reach. It doesn't matter the distance, but I'm imagining these being the others within this room, or within.
They are within reach in this room. They are within reach in this room.
Correct.
And when they're...
And the more I think about it, it's more of a going with Ed's radio metaphor, it's more of if the signal can be received, then that distance can be not an issue, not existent. There's other forms of receiving than the visual.
And other forms of receiving besides the visual. And when other forms of receiving besides the visual, is there anything else about other forms?
So with this, I think this might be a good place to stop, because I'd like to hear from you now at this point, because there's so much. That's exactly what I think we're getting at with telepathy, with precognition, with shared experience, with these. I'm seeing various points all around me right now that we could explore.
And various points, and we can pause, but I just want to, and various points around you that we could explore. And telepathy and...
Correct. And I'm thinking of Michael Murphy's The Future of the Body. You gave us a list at some point in that book, and those points on the list are many individuals and groups are exploring these points. And they're all revolving around the same bandwidth of points. So they're all there, and which direction we go from here could be anywhere.
Thank you, Doug. Well, I know you're on a schedule here. We've been working an hour now, or working and playing for this hour. So I want to be very respectful of the time, because I know it takes time to receive. And trance states are an opportunity in this busy world of ours to give and receive the kind of quality of attention that makes our trance states more effective. We're in trance states. This is the conversational. I'm going into a conversational mode, but I'm also sort of still drawing upon the trance state, creative learning opportunities that trance states often provide. I think in these trance states or altered states compared to what, there's also an element of risk. And that's why it's very important for me in these public-private spaces that we create a sense of a container so that is safe enough, so that we can hold the different kinds of energies and information that comes through, so that we have a permeable boundary, and we can be more transparent in our communications when that is so that we can, find that on the radio, we can differentiate between the static and the noise and the signal. And that's where I think what I really enjoyed about what you were saying is that you were able to use a metaphor that had been given by Ed in another thread. And I think that's really creative when we're starting to self-generate metaphors, and also we can resonate with another person's metaphors, and we can bring that into our communicational, meaning-making, sense-making spaces in a non-combative way, or a way that releases us from ranking and kind of rigid hierarchies. So I believe our organizational lives can be greatly enhanced when we become more and more facile with these kinds of interplays between different metaphors, so that we don't get trapped into the metaphorical construct of the fearless leader who's going to then command from top-down position. This is the metaphor, and you guys got to apply my metaphor. And I think this is the kind of rebellion or reject that I find widespread today in our organizational life. Many of us are mature enough to come up with our own metaphors and to implement our own metaphors in collaboration with other people who are able to generate their own metaphors. So I believe this is our, what may be calling us to come together today, you and I. And if you feel comfortable, I'm okay with sharing this. If you don't feel comfortable with that, that's okay too. I think it could just be for us. But I also think this is the kind of thing I would like to do much more of and do much more effectively, as I'm using I'm creating hopefully a methodology that is not going to turn into a rigid technique, but is going to be able to use multiple techniques. Because I believe we can move from a clean language orientation to which is much more of a ritual than it is like a conversation. Because I'm not right now I'm in a conversational space with you where I can project onto you, you can project onto me, we can argue about whose projections are correct, or your interpretation's better than my interpretation, blah, blah, blah. All of that's interesting and very useful. And then there's the kind of clean language space where I'm not doing that. I'm actually paying very, very good attention to what you actually say to the best of my ability, and crafting questions that are open-ended rather than questions that are designed to elicit a certain response. So it's a very different kind of discourse, I believe, that could emerge out of this kind of investigation, this kind of exploration. I don't have enough evidence for that, but I've just seen glimpses of possibilities that are quite amazing, where I really feel like people are opening up, to those cracks in the cosmic egg. And I think that I want to encourage that. But I definitely want to put a high priority on creating enough initial safety so that people can explore the non-ordinary or the novel in ways that are creative rather than destructive. As we all know, people can have many, many different ways of going into trance, many different ways of exploring altered states of consciousness. Not all of them would I recommend. I believe that what's most interesting to me is working with language in a very sophisticated way, as Milton Erickson did, and as I believe David Grove did, who created this clean language. Here's and also Caitlin Walker, clean language and symbolic modeling. I draw on her work. She has a training into attention. It's what she calls what she's doing. And I've worked with Penny and James Lawley and Penny Tompkins. I've worked with a lot of innovators here. And I'm doing something different than they're doing, although I draw from them and learn from them. Because I'm very interested, not in therapy or coaching, as I'm interested in group life, but not group life that's tied to some sort of dogma or some sort of business that's trying to generate and monetize, make money together, which is, I have nothing against that, but that's sort of not what I'm interested in right now. Especially when we're working with these liminal zones, as we've been doing today, working with lucid dreams and the paranormal. And these are out-of-body experiences, telepathy, remote viewing. I do think there's a family resemblance between all of these, but it's notoriously tricky because our traditional kind of science does not, especially the materialist kind of science, it's really hardcore materialist. Not all science is, but some of it is. Most of it is. I think that these areas of our human experience, which I think is very common, has been outlawed. And I think Paul and other people that we're reading who have a sort of integral slant start to realize that's coming out of a very deficient mental orientation. And the rational, of course, we definitely need, but the rational is not going to, can get us only so far. And just like the magical, we definitely need the magical, healthy forms of the magical, but there are limits to the magical. So I believe that there's been a win-lose as we have mutated from these different kinds of consciousness, mutations from the archaic, the magical, the mythical, the rational, and there's been trade-offs. We win and we lose. But I think this new kind of possibility, this new kind of mutation that's happening, I think Gebser labels this as we don't have to lose anything anymore. We can use all of it. We can use all of it well, and we don't have to create these rivalrous competitions between these different ways of using our intelligence. And we have multiple intelligences, no doubt. So I think we've done some of this today. I would love to listen to this and look at the notes that I've taken and maybe have a follow-up session with you. And if there's any drawings or any dreams or any reveries that happen in between now and then, that's cool. I would love you to bring that with us. And if I can get my friend Seth to join us, because he's very adept at clean language, and he also has a lot of other skills. I think we could, bring together a kind of multidisciplinary or transdisciplinary convocation of magicians and wizards and healthy forms of sorcery, perhaps. It's I have an open question about that, but I think now is the time when we want to open ourselves to the transconscious and what we might mean by that. I think the whole conscious unconscious divide makes less and less sense. And I think it's much more of a flow and dynamic. And we're moving from a conscious on top of an unconscious to something more Ericksonian, which is, it's no longer a subconscious. It's much more of something that's like this, rather than like this. And I think that is a very different kind of game. Anyway, that's my spiel. I apologize if I get a little long-winded because as you well know, it's sometimes very hard to put a practice sometimes is very easy, but putting it into some sort of theoretical framework is kind of tricky because we're dreaming every night. We're having reveries, we're having fantasies, and these are spontaneously occurring. And there's nothing we have to do necessarily to make them happen. They just happen. But it's what we do with them. And are we giving enough attention to them? Or are we just ignoring them, sweeping them under the rug, and getting into something that we think is more valuable or more important, like making money for the boss or whatever? I think this is the challenge we're having. We have had to put aside these kinds of explorations in favor of things that our society or our culture tells us are much more important for us to pay attention to. I think now that we're seeing these breakdowns happen on a very large scale, we're calling into question how we're using our attention. And I think these new kind of practices will evolve because we're under pressure for something new and different to happen. So I'm really welcoming this opportunity and very, very grateful that you're sharing your attention and your time, your valuable time with me today. And I'm looking forward to the next occasion we can set this up. And if it feels good, if it feels right, if the timing is right, because I think timing is extremely important, we could continue in this direction. I think it would be a very creative one. So.
Nice. I would embrace bringing Seth into at least one conversation and what I've learned over the course of my time and managing certain different modes of interaction online, and like you're saying, wait and see what happens with this. I will process this video as soon as it's able to be processed. But it's, yeah, in these changing times, something that came up that I'd like to maybe equate with what we could possibly get from the younger generations, the millennials, the 18 to 30-year-olds.
Well, set this in that age range, by the way.
Oh, really? Okay, great. But I only frequent one other group online, and that's a streaming group that's on a video game platform. They just are able to subdivide and do things outside of video games. I don't do video gaming, but these individuals were very interested in learning how to lucid dream, and they've stuck with it since October. And but what I want to get at is their way of interacting online. There's this flow. There can be hours of silence, no one getting a response to a certain comment, and it might be forgotten, but there's this constant kind of flow into, like, oh, we understand. That there's an understanding of time, of each other's time, of there's a general respect that maybe it's just this group in particular, but the understanding of we don't make jokes about autism or transsexuals, or that's already it's part of the culture. So there's no, you don't have to sidestep certain individuals or chastise anybody and let them know this is how it works. Everybody's on the same page as to how communication will occur. And so I've enjoyed this subgroup of individuals that I don't relate fully to them, but I've learned quite a bit of how we can utilize kind of the spontaneous conversation. This is somewhat planned conversation, but at the same time, to retain the flow, it would be nice to be able to reach out on the forum and say, I really need to have a clean session with you, John. Let's do it at this moment if you have this time slot available. If not, then I've got other ways to manage, or whatever it might be. But those are some ideas that I see us doing at this point. The cafe has switched over to Friday nights occasionally, it looks like. It can be the spontaneous grouping of individuals with a plan. And so this idea with that would be, I think, a great experience. And it'll be a template, a presentation that can be represented differently on down the road. It won't be exactly the same, but that's what I wanted to say about that. And just a general, a couple other things before we go, and we can keep talking a little bit longer, but just to thank you for being willing to dedicate your time to exploring the innards of others, and your listening, your intensity and general intention to kind of extract that light. So I appreciate that. And the last thing I want to check in with you, I know libraries are closed. You are getting out, that's great. So I'd recommend maybe two more hours max online. Don't spend your time in front of the computer. Take a break if you need it. But have you had a chance to take time out for yourself?
I have, yes, and I do take my cold baths and do my breath work, and the weather's nice today, and I'm in a very very good mood. I have a very elevated mood most of the time. And I really do want to think about Gebser and Sloterdijk and Aurobindo and Bateson. I don't think you were there for the Bateson. No, you were there for the Bateson, but you weren't there for the Gebser. But you're certainly familiar with Gebser.
Right.
And then you mentioned The Future of the Body, Michael Murphy's book. And I think that there's how we extract from all the things that we're reading something that's useful. It's going to vary from person to person, of course, and from group to group. But I think that we've done this, we've read these books together, and there are probably more books, a lot of books we are reading that this group doesn't know about, but that, you know, and everyone is going to bring new books in, but I think there has to be some sort of balance, I think, between reading and writing and arithmetic and dancing and singing and voice. And we've done a little voice work in the Milton. And I was talking to Judith, you were there actually, but I think I had another conversation with Judith, which wasn't recorded, where she was talking about, we talked about getting together and doing some community theater. It could be something as simple as like a Shakespeare sonnet, you know. I think there's lots of, and you and I did with Michael a Shakespeare reading. We did a section from Romeo and Juliet, as you may recall. So I think these are, so we all have different kinds of skills, and I believe it's, you know, if you can find the time and the energy and the intention, the attention can come together, we could do something different. And I am all for the spontaneous. And yet I also know be spontaneous is a mixed message. Because if you comply, you're not being spontaneous at all. So I think that's one of the problems with getting together and being spontaneous, is that sometimes people end up doing what they already know how to do pretty well, rather than doing something that they don't know anything about or are curious about, but, oh no, I'm not going to go that way because I'm out of control. So I want to find a way of being spontaneous and disciplined at the same time, a kind of disciplined flow state.
I'm looking at the stacks you have of books behind you, and I'm thinking of the libraries that are closed as the extreme side of that structure, ordered by number. And then there's the spontaneous side of the individual who just read a book that wants to improv off of what they've read.
That's
and
right.
It's useful. But the stacks behind you, you mentioned somebody, perhaps you took care of her, but she also had stacks of books, and somebody was starting to organize herself, and she said, no. Like, she knew where everything was. And these stacks are the organized disorganization. So whatever that stack is there behind your left shoulder, I'm sure that's a whole 3 months worth of like compiling a certain self, a certain John, and that is a description of who you were at that time, and it can be revisited. You can take a glance at it and say, I know that, and that makes sense at this time. So I fully understand what you mean. I don't want to be spontaneous all the time either. And going back to the reading, I think I'll post it to the forum. I did some writing 2 or 3 days ago, maybe over the weekend, of how there is so much that we're reading, and just simply, if we have a thought on that particular book, there's no structure to this thread, kind of like the music thread has become a life of its own. I imagine this is the reading thread, and let's say, oh, I read this, here's a quote, and see where that goes. It doesn't have to be, or perhaps help with a certain book, understanding what is meant, whatever. It can, but that might at least allow us to piece together some of these strange, that we all are readers here. So I think that would be a useful thread. That's something for me personally. We'll see where that goes.
Yeah.
I don't have any. I'm going to say I don't have any other words other than I appreciate our time together, but I'd let you close out with whatever you'd like to say.
Well, I guess what I've learned today, what do I know now that I didn't know before this conversation, is we've come a long way, and we have a long way to go. I think it's quite exhilarating for me to explore the internal process of another human being. To me, it's the most rewarding work there is. But I don't want to put it into a therapy format or into a coaching format. As many people who are good at this, that's what they like to do, because it monetizes it and makes it, you know, can be very lucrative. But I also think it tends to stay stuck in a system that is collapsing very rapidly right now. And I believe we need to find new ways of entering into the internal process of another person with integrity. But you know, that's, I think, not going to be happening anytime soon. But then I don't know. There may be a rupture that's so gigantic that we may find we're going to have to bring forward or conduct forward into different contexts what we learned. That doesn't work anymore, but we learned something, and we need to find ways of conducting that forward into a new kind of context, which we're going to create together. And so I think we need to use all of our knowledge, use all of it well. And I'm quoting Milton Erickson here. And I feel that this was a very good beginning, but it's also not a beginning at all. It's a continuation of what we've already been doing. So I think we should just sort of pretty much do what we're already doing, but just do it better. You know, we can always improve. And that's my intention here, is to, you know, create the conditions for breakthrough rather than break down. Although sometimes you have to break down before you can break through. So I think we're in the middle of that very powerful paradox right now. So thank you all. Thank you very much as always, dear friend. Hang in there, stay healthy, and we'll talk real soon. And we'll make something happen, maybe with Judith, maybe with my friend Seth, maybe Marco, or maybe Michael. I feel like I'm very drawn to perceptual learners. See, hear, smell, taste, touch. And then we can get very abstract. And then we can find new ways of seeing, smelling, hearing, tasting, touching. So I think it's this body is not what it's, I think we really don't know what this body is yet. I think we're just playing around with it at the, you know, the margins, those leaky margins between the subtle and the physical. And I think it's a very powerful space. These semantic spaces we're creating, these neuro-semantic spaces. So thank you so much once again. And for your trust also, because I'm very aware of how sensitive these internal processes are. And I believe we want to really protect one another in these difficult times from unnecessary intrusion. So thank you once again. I hope some of this makes sense when we replay it.
I know this was a necessity to a certain extent in many ways. So I have a rough sketch of the drawing here.
Oh, good.
The V shape, but I'll update it with a little bit more detailed pieces when I have the chance. We also, I know, the Eastern Magicians was a useful triad there with TJ as well. I wouldn't mind perhaps adding that, but we'll wait and see what happens.
You, me, and TJ, we're all in the same time zone, so that's not that hard probably to get something together for us. We'll see.
And did he say he has 3 hours less commute time? Which that alone right there is a good opportunity just to become sane once again.
Well, I think we should definitely use this unprecedented pattern interruption in ways that could really help us redirect our attention in ways that we may find more creativity or wiggle room, because I think creating our own rhythm is something we're not used to, because we're always being told what to do by somebody else. And I think this is a real challenge for us. It's like, wow, we have time, a little more time than we usually do. What are we going to do with it? So that's great. I'm glad you reminded me of the Eastern Standard Time magicians, I think we called it. We're working on reading at our best. Oh, and also
the EST magician.
Yeah, I love that. I'd also like to think about when health at your best. That's like what? Just as we worked with writing at your best and reading at your best, I would like to think about metaphors for health. We have lots of metaphors for disease, but it's very hard, I think, for most of us, I'm quoting Bateson, to talk about health. We can talk about pathology, but health is very hard to talk about because it's so related to the sacred. It's hard to talk about the sacred because it's easy to talk about something that's broken and needs to be fixed, but it's very hard to talk about something that's working already pretty well. And I think a lot of the resource, I think what I would like to pay a lot more attention to is our health and our sanity and the sacred, rather than what's broken. And I think that's could be extremely liberating and take us out of the addiction we have to problem solving, which of course tends to generate more problems that we need to solve. So I hope that we could, create a space where weirdos and visionaries feel comfortable enough to open up to the possibilities of this unusual time we're in right now. So thank you so much.
Thank you, John, and just take care today.
I will.
Carry
You
forth.
too. You too. Have a great one.
Goodbye.
See you later.